But joining me now is Rear Admiral Dr. Chris Parry, CBE, former Royal Navy commander. Chris, very good evening to you. Welcome to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham. This strikes me as, at the very least, a bit of a travesty. Without even knowing exactly what all the details of this are, it would appear that these guys in the SAS took out a very dangerous terrorist who they believed was about to detonate a suicide vest of some kind or another. Why are they being investigated?
I think in the current climate, Mike, any sort of allegation of misconduct is being investigated very thoroughly. It's only right that if an accusation is made, then we have to clear the air, see what happened, and basically allocate blame or not according to what's happened. You're quite right, though. I mean, this is a situation where you had a guy who potentially was a suicide bomber, and you have to make split-second decisions. And what amazes me about these sorts of situations is that people who've never been anywhere near a situation like this think that they can pontificate about what people should and shouldn't have done in the heat of the moment.
Well, exactly right. I mean, it's a bit like the way we treat armed police in this country, isn't it? When anybody fires a gun, there's immediate sort of view that there must be something wrong and there must be an investigation and that police officer must be suspended. These guys are still on active duty, apparently. But I think the problem I've got with it is that they've been sort of arrested on suspicion of alleged war crimes. I mean, it's not as if the armed forces are going, tentatively into this to see what might have happened. They're arrested on...
Mike, to be fair, they haven't been arrested. They've just been questioned, I think, in relation to this, and people are trying to ascertain the facts and see what happened. So, I mean, SAS guys, do great resistance to interrogation courses, so I'm sure they're not really fazed by it, to tell you the truth.
Well, they may not be, but I mean, they will be if they finally are called up in front of some kind of court-martial based on charges of war crimes, because I think the trouble is, it seems to me, looking at what's also happening up in Scotland, where another SAS former officer is being threatened with 6 months in prison. He's, in fact, been sentenced to 6 months in prison for not cooperating with an inquest, of all things, into an incident where 3 members of the IRA were killed back in the 90s.
Yeah, Mike, I mean, we've got to see what the evidence is first. I'm one of those people who believes that, if you murder someone, whatever you're doing, it's got to be held to account. We can't have moral equivalence between ourselves and the IRA and the Taliban and all these other people. We work for a democracy standards, and if those standards are contravened, then we have to call it out, to tell you the truth. But you're actually absolutely right. There has to be a statute of limitations on this. You can't be dragging people back from 40 years, 30 years ago, when the evidence, frankly, it isn't that good. And you can't really hold somebody accountable in a court of law when everything's so hazy. And it's just a matter of emotion and opinion that is actually driving it.
No, of course. And I mean, you've been in theatre of war, you've been in very many different arenas doing the job that you've done all your life. I mean, what's it like if you are in a company with some people who are sort of under suspicion like this? Does it change the way things are done?
Mike, not really. I mean, to be fair, I've never been in that situation where you've had people around you who are under that sort of suspicion. I've worked with special forces. I've worked with, my colleagues. You're just trying to do your job properly. You know what the rules are. You know what the rules of engagement. You know what the law is. And within that, you have to do your best. But there comes a point where the law of self-defense actually comes in. There comes a point where somebody has convinced you, whether he is going to do you harm or not, he's convinced you that he wants to do you harm, and you have to take action.
Right. Exactly right. And as you say, I don't think many of us who have never been in that situation, and I count many people perhaps in the Ministry of Defence in that, and they would understand how that feels. You don't get two chances. I was fortunate enough to spend some time in Bosnia with the British military there in Vitez. And I never met a better bunch of people, I think, in my entire life. I mean, I'm still in touch with some of them because they were such incredible people. But they also, every single day, with Colonel Bob Stewart at the helm, would go out into, dangerous territory. They'd get sniped at, they'd get shot at. They had to make split-second decisions on whether to take somebody out who was standing in front of them with a Kalashnikov. That's not for ordinary people to decide whether you did the right thing or not, is it?
Yeah, Mike, I've given evidence as a specialist witness in a court of law before, and the most ridiculous question I was asked by a barrister was, now captain as I was then. Captain Parry, do you think that that is what a reasonable person would have done in those circumstances?
Right.
And I had to explain to him that this is not a reasonable situation, and you actually have different criteria based on what's going on around you that leads to your decision. It's not a reasonable situation by any means.
No, exactly right. Let me ask you just finally, off to the side a little bit, this story that's been doing the rounds over the last few days about the German military guy who seems to have leaked a load of information over an open line regarding British operations and NATO operations. What do you make of that? I mean, that seems extraordinary, doesn't it?
Do you know, Mike, people do it all the time. They get very complacent about using sort of open networks and phone calls that can be intercepted. And the head of the Luftwaffe here, head of the German Air Force, he's managed to communicate on an unsecure line things he really shouldn't be talking about. And also, I've seen all over Twitter that people are misinterpreting what's going on here. We don't have British troops or any British personnel fighting in Ukraine. They're probably giving advice on certain technical matters to do with some of the equipment we've sent, but nobody's fighting. But of course, all over Twitter, all over social media, you've got the usual suspects trying to get everybody into trouble.
Yeah, well, Twitter's getting worse and worse and worse, it seems to me. I mean, there's nobody on Twitter now that appears to be in any way sensible. You put out some kind of statement.
Well, you and me, Mike.
And you and I are about the only two left, I think. Everybody else has gone completely barking mad. But Chris, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.